That spring morning in Commerce, Oklahoma, I witnessed something that would challenge everything America thought it knew about right and wrong. April 6th, 1934. The air was thick with tension, the kind of morning when you could feel trouble brewing like a storm on the horizon. Nobody in Commerce could have predicted that their police chief would spend the day with America's most wanted criminals and come back defending them. Because I was there that day. When Police Chief Percy Boyd and Constable Cal Campbell drove out to investigate what they thought was just another group of drunks stuck in a ditch, I watched as a routine call turned into a kidnapping that would shock the nation. Historical background: America's war on crime. Commerce, Oklahoma in 1934 was a hard-working mining town of about 3,000 souls. Folks made their living pulling lead and zinc from the earth, trying to scratch out a decent life during the worst economic disaster in American history. The Great Depression had been crushing dreams for 5 brutal years. But it wasn't just economic hardship that plagued the heartland. This was the height of what newspapers called the public enemy era. Bank robbers and kidnappers roamed the countryside with military-grade weapons, turning small towns into battlefields. John Dillinger was still alive and robbing banks. Pretty Boy Floyd was hiding out in Oklahoma's Cookson Hills. Machine Gun Kelly had terrorized the region just months before. And then there were Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow, 24 and 25 years old, lovers turned killers who'd been cutting a bloody path across the Southwest for 2 years. They'd killed at least 12 people by that April morning, including 8 law enforcement officers. The newspapers portrayed them as romantic rebels, but to cops like Percy Boyd and Cal Campbell, they were cold-blooded killers. Boyd was 42 years old, a career lawman who'd seen plenty of trouble in his years as Commerce Police Chief. Campbell was 60, a widower and father of 8, who'd taken the constable job after the Depression closed his construction business. 2 good men trying to keep their community safe in dangerous times. They had no idea they were about to encounter the most notorious outlaws in America. And they certainly had no idea that one of them would survive to tell a story that would turn the Bonnie and Clyde legend on its head. A routine call gone wrong. The morning of April 6th started routine enough. Boyd was at his desk handling paperwork when farmer Tom Wilson burst through the door around 8:30 a.m. "Chief, there's some folks stuck in the mud out on the old mining road," Wilson said, out of breath from running. "Car's been there since yesterday evening. Looks suspicious. Got guns stacked up in the back window clear as day." Boyd looked up from his reports. Cars getting stuck in Oklahoma mud wasn't unusual after spring rains, but guns stacked in plain sight, that was different. "How many people?" Boyd asked, reaching for his hat. 3 looked like, 2 men and a woman. Tried to wave me down for help, but when I saw those rifles, I got out of there quick. Boyd nodded. In 1934, with desperados roaming the countryside, a wise man didn't stop for strangers with visible weapons. He walked next door to the constable's office, where Cal Campbell was finishing his morning coffee. "Cal, we got a situation on the mining road. Folks stuck in the mud with a car full of guns. Want to take a ride out there with me?" Campbell set down his cup, grabbed his badge and service revolver. At 60, he wasn't looking for trouble, but he'd sworn an oath to serve and protect. The 2 lawmen climbed into Boyd's official car and headed west out of town. The mining road was a mess of ruts and mud from recent rains. About 3 miles out, they spotted the stuck vehicle, a tan Ford V8 sedan tilted at an odd angle in a deep mud hole. Steam was rising from the radiator. "There they are," Boyd said, slowing down. He could see figures moving around the car, 2 men trying to rock it free, while a small blonde woman sat in the passenger seat. What Boyd couldn't see clearly from a distance was that one of the men was Clyde Barrow, America's most wanted criminal. The woman was Bonnie Parker, whose face was on wanted posters in every post office in 5 states. The second man was Henry Methvin, a recent addition to the gang. And what Boyd definitely couldn't see was that the car was loaded with enough firepower to outfit a small army: shotguns, pistols, and a Browning automatic rifle capable of firing 650 rounds per minute. "Let's see if they need help," Boyd said, stopping his car about 50 yards away. Campbell got out first, walking toward the stuck vehicle with the casual confidence of a man who dealt with stranded motorists hundreds of times. Boyd followed, one hand resting on his service weapon out of habit. That's when everything went wrong. Clyde saw the uniforms and recognized immediately what was happening. After months of running from the law, his reflexes were hair-trigger sharp. He grabbed the BAR from the back seat and dove behind the car. "Get down," he shouted to Bonnie and Methvin. "It's the laws." Campbell, still walking forward with his hands visible, suddenly found himself staring down the barrel of the most feared weapon in America. He'd been a construction contractor before the Depression. He had no experience with gun battles, no training for this moment, but he was a brave man. He drew his service revolver and fired first. The bullet went wide, striking the Ford's rear fender. Clyde and Methvin returned fire immediately. The quiet Oklahoma morning exploded with gunshots that echoed across the prairie like thunder. Campbell went down with the first burst, struck in the abdomen. Boyd drew his weapon and tried to return fire, but he was outgunned and outnumbered. A bullet grazed his head, drawing blood and stunning him. Within 30 seconds, the shooting stopped. Campbell lay motionless in the mud. Boyd was on his knees, dizzy from the head wound, his gun fallen into the muck beside him. Clyde approached cautiously, BAR still trained on the wounded police chief. "You hit bad?" he asked. Boyd touched his head, his hand coming away bloody. "I don't think so." "Good," Clyde said, "because you're coming with us." 24 hours that changed everything. What happened next defied every expectation Percy Boyd had about desperate criminals. Instead of being executed on the spot, he found himself being helped to his feet and guided toward the Ford. "Easy does it, Chief," Bonnie said, getting out of the passenger seat to make room. "Let me look at that head." She had a clean handkerchief in her purse, which she used to gently clean the blood from Boyd's wound. Her touch was surprisingly gentle, almost motherly. "It's not deep," she told Clyde, "but head wounds bleed something awful. We need to get him bandaged proper." While Bonnie tended to Boyd, Clyde and Methvin solved their stuck car problem. They flagged down a passing truck driver, forced him at gunpoint to pull their Ford from the mud, then sent him on his way with a warning to keep quiet for at least an hour. "Sorry about your partner," Clyde told Boyd as they loaded him into the back seat. "We didn't want any shooting, but he drew first." Boyd stared at him in amazement. An apology from a cold-blooded killer? With Boyd wedged between Bonnie and Methvin in the back seat, they headed north toward Kansas. For the next 12 hours, Percy Boyd experienced something no lawman had ever experienced before, and lived to tell about it. "What's your first name, Chief?" Bonnie asked as they drove. "Percy," he replied, still stunned by the surreal politeness of his captors. "That's a nice name," she said. "I'm Bonnie. This is Clyde, and that's Henry. I know you know who we are, but I thought proper introductions were in order." Boyd nodded, still trying to process the situation. He was being kidnapped by America's most notorious criminals, and they were making conversation like they'd just met at a church social. "Are you married, Percy?" Bonnie continued. "Any children?" "Married, 20 years this fall," Boyd replied automatically. "2 daughters." "That's wonderful," Bonnie smiled genuinely. "Family is the most important thing in the world. Clyde and I, we're family too, in our own way." As they drove through the Oklahoma countryside, something remarkable happened. Instead of the terror Boyd expected, he found himself oddly comfortable. Bonnie continued to fuss over his head wound, changing the bandage every few hours. When they stopped for gas, Clyde made sure Boyd got coffee and food, even though their own funds were limited. "You don't have to be afraid of us, Percy," Bonnie said during one stop. "We're not going to hurt you. We're not monsters, whatever the newspapers say." "But you've killed people," Boyd said, his professional instincts finally kicking in. "Yes," Clyde replied quietly. "We have, and I wish we hadn't, but they were trying to kill us first. Your partner today, I'm genuinely sorry about that. He seemed like a good man." The honesty in Clyde's voice was unsettling. This wasn't the swaggering criminal Boyd had expected. This was a young man who seemed genuinely remorseful about the violence that had consumed his life. As evening approached, they crossed into Kansas. Boyd realized they were taking him further from home, but strangely, he wasn't afraid. These people, these infamous killers, were treating him better than some of his own relatives did. "Percy," Bonnie said as they drove through the Kansas night, "can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you think we're evil? Really evil, I mean?" Boyd considered the question carefully. Everything he'd been taught, everything he believed as a lawman, said yes. But looking at this young woman who'd spent the day caring for his wounds, who spoke lovingly about family, who seemed genuinely concerned about his well-being, "I think you're people who made some bad choices," he said finally. "But evil? I'm not sure evil people would have bandaged my head or bought me dinner." Bonnie's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you for saying that." They spent the night in the car, parked in a secluded grove of trees. Bonnie insisted Boyd take her blanket to stay warm. When he protested, she said, "You're our guest, Percy. Guests should be comfortable." Guest. Not hostage. Guest. The next morning, they drove to Fort Scott, Kansas, where Clyde stopped the car on a quiet residential street. "This is where we part ways, Percy," he said. But before Boyd could get out, Bonnie stopped him. She'd been working on something all morning, cleaning and pressing a white shirt that had been in their luggage. "You can't go home in bloody clothes," she said. "Your wife will worry herself sick. Put this on." Boyd stared at the crisp, clean shirt. "I can't take your clothes." "It's Clyde's," Bonnie said, "and he insists. Don't you, honey?" Clyde nodded. A lawman should look respectable. Boyd changed shirts in the back seat. When he was finished, Clyde handed him $5. "For the bus fare home," Clyde explained. "I can't take your money," Boyd protested. "You can and you will," Clyde said firmly. "We've put you through enough." As Boyd prepared to leave, Bonnie grabbed his arm gently. "Percy, if anyone asks what we were like, would you tell them the truth?" "What truth is that?" "That we're not the monsters they say we are. That we tried to treat you decent." Boyd looked at her earnest face, then at Clyde, who was watching the interaction with obvious emotion. "I'll tell them the truth," he promised. Bonnie smiled. "There is one more thing. The newspapers, they keep saying I smoke cigars. It's not true. That picture they found in Joplin, the cigar was Clyde's. I just posed with it as a joke. Would you mind telling folks I don't smoke cigars? It bothers me that people think I do." Of all the things she could have asked, freedom for herself and Clyde, leniency from the law, understanding from the public, she asked him to correct a minor detail about her personal habits. Boyd nodded solemnly. "I'll make sure people know." Aftermath. The statement that shocked America. Percy Boyd walked into the Fort Scott police station at 2:30 p.m. on April 7th, 1934, and created a sensation that would echo across America for decades. "I've been kidnapped by Bonnie and Clyde," he told the desk sergeant. Within an hour, reporters from across Kansas and Missouri were converging on Fort Scott. FBI agents were on their way from Kansas City. The kidnapping of a police chief by America's most wanted criminals was front-page news. But what Boyd told them defied every expectation. "They treated me like a guest in their home," he said to a packed room of reporters. "The woman, Bonnie, she doctored my head wound and fussed over me like a mother. Clyde gave me his own shirt and money for bus fare. In 24 hours, they never once threatened me or made me fear for my life." The reporters stared in disbelief. This wasn't the story they'd come to hear. "But Chief Boyd," pressed a reporter from the Kansas City Star, "these are cold-blooded killers. They murdered your constable just yesterday." Boyd's face darkened. "Yes, they killed Cal Campbell." And Clyde Barrow expressed genuine regret about it, said Campbell seemed like a good man and he wished it hadn't happened. "Are you actually defending them?" another reporter demanded. Boyd paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm telling you what I experienced. For 24 hours, I was completely at their mercy. They could have killed me and dumped.